Now, if anyone can stir Nigerians to action, it's the theologian, human rights activist, social commentator, and former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat in Nigeria, Father George Ehusani, currently the Executive Director of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation. His works have inspired countless numbers. Many call him for advice, many others pay tribute. Recently, Father Ehusani has been advising Nigeria's policymakers to prepare for the social upheaval that will be caused by deepening poverty and the growing inequality between rich and poor in this country, calling it the defining challenge of the next decade. Well, now he's had a premonition that something momentous is about to happen in Nigeria, a sort of nightmare in which a frightening horror called the People's Revolt is about to strike. His recent homily on the issue hit a rhythm with many people and went viral. In a sense, it was more than just a speech. It was a canticle and a prayer, each sentence ringing like a symphony bell out of the jangling discord of the Nigerian nation. Take a listen.
We have the good, I have constantly said in this country, until Nigerians get to a stage to say, no, you can't be minister of power if it is generator that is powering your whole house and you have not provided generator for every other person. You cannot be minister of housing if you are not staying in a government apartment. You cannot be minister of health if you do not have your treatment in this country. You cannot be minister of education if your children are all schooling outside. You can't. Why? Because human beings have self-interest. There is what is called self-interest. If his children are going to go to the government secondary school, he will make sure that government secondary schools are well taken care of. If his family is going to go to the general hospital next door, he will make sure that general hospital is well taken care of. But as long as leaders do not share in the plight of the people, as long as leaders can fly to the US, to UK, to Dubai for their health care and condemn the people to this kind of conditions here, as long as that is the situation, we're not moving anywhere. So Nigerians will have to rise up and say, no, you can't be our minister for education because your children are not schooling here.
And that is, of course, Father George Ehusani. Well, for more on all that, I'm delighted to be joined now in the studio by the theologian, human rights activist, social commentator, and former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat in Nigeria, Father George Ehusani, who's also, of course, currently the Executive Director of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation. Thank you very much
Thank
indeed
you, Charles,
for coming in.
The Arise team. Thank you.
It all sounds implacably logical, doesn't it? When you leave people amid the ruins of their hopes, they will bring all the dark passions that have blighted their lives, and then they'll rise up and hit you in the face.
Yes, it is logical. I mean, it is said that if we do not change our ways, if we do not change our course, we end up where we are headed. And where we are headed is not where we would like to be. Where we are headed is destruction. I mean, a people that have organized or disorganized themselves for this quality of life cannot have a future, cannot have a wholesome future. I just coming now, I was telling my driver that the kind of society we have organized, the children of our elite, economic elite, political elite, military elite, cannot come back to this country and walk safe on the streets of this country. It's not possible, because the kind of society their parents have organized is not the kind of society that they would like to live in. So what kind of legacy have the political elite, the economic elite, the social elite, what kind of legacy have they left? And time is running out. Let's put it that way. Time is running out. What we require today is some powerful gesture of repentance from successive members of the leadership, successive generations of leaders and elite. We need powerful gestures of repentance, meaning that those who have been looting the resources of this country, it is not enough to stop looting. They must invest, return a lot of what they have looted, invest it in programs for the poor, health programs, education programs, sanitation programs, nutritional programs, so that people can see that there is some gesture that we recognize that we have participated in ruining this country.
Otherwise,
the revenge of the poor. The people will revolt. And it is, you don't need to be a soothsayer to see it happening. You don't need to be a soothsayer. It is in the course of nature. When the gladiators go into excesses in their gladiatorial enterprise, nature has a way of knocking them out. Nature has a way, because it is not in the way of nature to allow, let's say, as we have in this country, islands of affluence amidst a sea of poverty. Nature does not allow that kind of thing to continue for too long. Nigeria now has the unenviable record of the worst scenario of poverty and affluence, the highest degree of discrepancy between extreme wealth on the one hand and dehumanizing degradation on the other. I say that cannot continue for too long. We have come up to this level. Perhaps Nigerians have endured it because of our cultural, ethnic, religious antipathies. But that will not continue. And the elite have continued to exploit the religious sentiments, the cultural sentiments, the traditional sentiments, the ethnic sentiments. But a time is coming when the poor will recognize that, listen, we need to work together. We need to recognize who our enemies are. That it is not the Igbo man next door. It is not the Ishekiri man next door. It is not the thief man next door. We need to recognize that our country is not poor. We as a people have been impoverished. It is always a shame when I travel outside this country and they are talking about Nigeria being poor. Nigeria is not poor. Nigerians have been impoverished. We need to get the terminologies right.
Now, we're going to have a chance to talk quite a bit about all that in a minute, but I think a lot of people are curious to know who you are, where you've come from, who you are today, and how you got there. I mean, where were you born, and what part of Nigeria do you come from?
I was born 61 years ago in Okene in Kogi State. My mother is still alive at 96. I'm grateful to God, but I lost my father 42 years ago. So I was born in Okene in 1957, and I grew up there, and I schooled there, primary school and secondary school in Okene. I went to a government secondary school, and it was a fantastic...
Well, because I was going to ask you, what sort of education did you have? Because clearly you have this, with all respect, incredible intellectual versatility, where you appear to be passionate and knowledgeable on virtually every subject. I've spoken to you innumerable times. You are an intelligent man and a man of many talents. I mean, how much of that is autodidactic? In other words, how much of that is self-taught?
Let me begin by saying I am grateful to God for whatever talents, and I know He has gifted me with a lot of talents. But also, I was privileged to grow up in a society that was a bit more organized than what we have today. I went to a public primary school and a public secondary school, government secondary school, Okene. So I didn't go to a private school. In fact, in my days, we didn't have nursery school. So I went from my house to primary one, and then went through years of primary school and years of secondary school. From secondary school, I went straight to a major seminary to prepare for the Catholic priesthood. And then I spent 6 years preparing for the Catholic priesthood, and I graduated with a degree in theology. Now, after that, I worked for 7 years as a priest in Lokoja Diocese. I belonged to Lokoja Diocese. And then I left for the United States, where I studied bioethics for a master's degree. And then I studied theology with a particular focus on social ethics and African enculturation for my doctorate. I had my doctorate in Howard University, Washington, D.C. This is
a doctorate in divinity?
Yes, right. From Howard University. I have attended a number of courses. I derive a lot of benefit, a lot of pleasure in attending courses in different things. And God has given me this curious mind to want to know. So the courses I have attended are in theology, but they are not limited to theology. They are in social ethics. They are in all kinds of things. And you know, if you are to apply the scriptures and apply theological thinking to the issues of the day, then it will lead you to politics. It will lead you to economics. Right. It will lead you to sociology. It will lead you to all kinds of things.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought. We'll continue in a moment. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we continue our chat with the human rights activist, social commentator, and former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat in Nigeria, Father George Ehusani. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, according to recent figures released by the World Bank, an increase in India's prosperity has coincided with the loss of an unwanted and rather unsavory title, the country with the largest number of people living in extreme poverty. A report by the Brookings Institute says it's now Nigeria that has the most people in the world who get by on less than the equivalent of $1.90 a day. It's worth pointing out that India has nearly 7 times the population of Nigeria, but still has fewer very poor people. Well, one anti-poverty activist who works with extremely poor people in Nigeria is the former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat of Nigeria, Father George Ehusani. We'll be chatting some more with him in a moment. But first, here is a warning. Here he is warning of the social upheaval and impending revolt of the poor in Nigeria. Take a listen.
So when you have a situation, rather than the people making sacrifice and demonstrating how much sacrifice you have made for the people, then we say, yes, you be our leader because you have suffered for us. You have denied yourself legitimate pleasures for our sake. That is what used to qualify people for leadership. Now, we have people who conquer us. They conquer us. Then they take the resources of our land to reconquer us and remain there, and it becomes difficult to move them out of power. But someday, as I always say, the revenge of the poor is at the corner. The revenge of the poor is coming. And that one, you will not be able to do anything about it. You can have your jeep. You can have your generators. You can have everything bulletproof. But the revenge of the poor, it happened in France. It happened in Russia. It has just happened in Sudan. It will happen here. Unless we change our course, we will end up where we are heading. And where we are heading now is unfortunately, it's a violent revolution.
Father George Ehusani, and he's with me in the studio, the theologian, human rights activist, social commentator, and former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat in Nigeria, and also currently the Executive Director of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. We'll talk more about the things you were speaking of there, but just going back and looking at the way that you've evolved, when did you emerge, if you like, from your shell and realize that you had this calling to serve the people of Nigeria?
Actually, my doctoral dissertation is titled Ozovehe, The Human Person is Life. The human person is Imago Dei, image of God. And I did a comparative study of the Judeo-Christian concept of the Imago Dei, image of God, with the African concept of the human person being of supreme value. I did a comparative study of the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Hausa concept of the value of the human being, the high worth of the human being as against money or material acquisitions. Now, having studied that and come home and meet a very ruthless dictatorship, that was 1990 under Babangida. And these are the things that
was the military ruler, General
yes,
Babangida, right?
Yes. And then followed by that of Abacha from 1993. Now, I couldn't help. I had just spent years celebrating in my studies and in my writing the value of the human person. When I came home and saw the devaluation of the human person, whose rights were denied, suppressed, and people were being jailed, people were disappearing, and so on and so forth, I could not but throw myself into the ring and be part of the pro-democracy advocates. I had to. I was very close to the Ganifawa Himis, the Bekor and Somkutis, the Adesanyas, and all those people who are in Adeko, all those people who are Olisa Bakogba, and so on and so forth. We were working together. In fact, at some point, meetings were being held at the Catholic Secretariat. So this is how I got involved. And from about 1993-94, I was writing in the newspapers, The Guardian, This Day, and so on, almost on a weekly basis, denouncing a lot of the injustices in the regime and in the society. It is a painful thing to know, to see that this is, I'm talking of about 25 years ago, that today, those evils are still there, even though we say we have transited to democracy, but the oppression of the poor is still there. And in some areas, it's even worse than during the military.
Right. So is this your destiny? I mean, you feel that at the very core of your personality, were you meant to be a sort of national conscience, and anything less would have been almost an almost criminal waste, perhaps, of your considerable talents?
It is said that people plan or dream about the kind of life they want to live, but life throws challenges upon you. And life directs you where to go. Because it is those challenges, how you confront those challenges and respond to those demands of life. Meaning that the Lord has given to me a consciousness of the equality of persons. I know that every human being has equal value before our Almighty God. And so for me to watch a human being being devalued from the womb to the grave, there is a passion within me to do something about it. And so, yes, I gradually saw that this was an area of focus for me to expend my energies and my talents and my skills and my studies. This is an area calling for my input along with others.
Well, the logical extension to that, one would have thought, would have been politics. Why have you never pursued a career in politics? I mean, you seem like the ideal person to do that in a country like Nigeria. You've got the right mix of intelligence, vision, sensitivity, and caring, as well as the will to change society for the better.
I am a Catholic priest.
Yeah, but Catholic priests have got into politics.
No, and it is a major part of our discipline not to get involved in partisan politics.
Right.
So that we can help guide the progress of society, but not partisan politics. Priests have been appointed to several positions who take the permission of their bishop and get involved. But for the priest to climb the rostrum and campaign for votes, because in each case you have a congregation and people belong to several parties in your congregation. You don't want to be seen as belonging to one party against the other.
Right.
Not in the acrimonious kind of politics we do in this country, where party politics is almost like a platform for enmity. Now, that will not be good for a Catholic priest.
But of course, you're no longer just preoccupied with your priestly calling. I mean, we can see that you're clearly a social human rights anti-poverty activist. So you're not just dealing with saving souls for the kingdom of heaven. I mean, you want his will to be done on earth as well, by transforming the economic situation here and trying to create a more equitable world. So to that extent, do you see yourself as a sort of liberation theologian?
You did say, I heard you say, you do this as well. I would like to correct that. I am not involved in social advocacy as well as my priestly ministry. No, the social advocacy is a constitutive element of my call to promote the kingdom. The 1971 Synod of Bishops in Rome clearly stated that actions for the promotion of justice and the liberation of the poor they are constitutive dimensions of evangelization. So that's why I say it is not as well. It is actually properly understood what people call liberation theology, properly understood, they are constitutive elements of our preaching the gospel. Because if you recognize the first sermon of Jesus in Nazareth is, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Luke chapter 4, verse 18. He has sent me to liberate the poor, to open the eyes of the blind, to set captives free, to declare the Lord's year of favor.
Right, but in the process of liberating the poor, do you think priests should be poor? I mean, how can someone be a priest or a pastor if there is one person in his parish who is poorer than he is or she is?
Very important question. It is a major source of contradiction in today's Nigeria, where we
it's
now
not just Nigeria.
Not
it's
just
all over,
Nigeria.
I mean, the Vatican has tremendous wealth, and yet the world is full of poverty.
The Vatican's wealth is used to support poor people in all poor countries.
Yeah, but
I've
not only
Caritas
been,
International.
Yes, but I've not only been to the Vatican,
yes.
I've been to the Pope's summer home at Castel Gandolfo,
yes.
outside Rome.
Well,
I mean, it is an unbelievable palace. If he sold it, he could save lots of souls.
Well, it does not belong to the Pope that is there for 5 years or 10 years. That palace is there for 1,000, 2,000 years.
But it's a palace.
That palace is there for 1,000 or 2,000 years.
And Jesus didn't live in a palace.
And recognize that the present Pope, does not live in a palace. I hope you recognize that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The present Pope Francis decided to live in a hostel, that accommodates several people who go to Rome. So the Pope is making a point that actually he believes that church leaders are not supposed to live in palaces. And you know that when he goes to any place and they bring all the limousines, he rejects it and takes a small
But you do agree that the Catholic Church to which you belong has historically been quite elitist, to the point where, as you pointed out, the current Pope Francis has become anti-elitist, calling for a more just social economic system.
Absolutely. The point
not
is,
just in society, but in the church
yes.
as well.
And that is what he should do. And that is what any prophetic leader should do. The point is, we have a 2,000-year history. Tell me another institution in the world that 2,000 years is still running. Within those 2,000 years, there are high points and low points. There are the Middle Ages with all kinds of challenges and so on and so forth. There were times that there was a confusion between the empire and the church, where the bishop and the emperor are together and so on and so forth. We have moved away from that. And we are talking about the church of the poor. To recognize that this anomaly of church leaders owning private jets and having the best houses and the best whatever, it is an anomaly, because the Jesus who is our Lord, whom we follow, look at the kind of life he lived. So whereas you are a promoter of the kind of life that is dignified for everyone, you are a promoter of dignified life for everyone,
right,
of health care, of education, of good education for everyone. Your own life should be modest.
Okay, stay with us, Father George Ehusani. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we continue our chat with the famous human rights activist and former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat in Nigeria, Father George Ehusani. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. As President Buhari begins his second term in office, two critical issues remain prominent: poverty and unemployment. The president has been speaking of lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty, but neither Mr. Buhari nor any other president since Nigeria returned to democracy in 1999 has been able to fulfill the expectations of Nigerians in terms of poverty alleviation. The anti-poverty activist, Father George Ehusani, has been one voice crying out, warning Nigerian politicians that their consistent failure to address deepening poverty and unemployment will have dire consequences as the climate of apartheid between rich and poor continues to worsen, creating a separate class of winners and losers, with the losers making up the overwhelming majority. Take a listen to Father Ehusani speaking recently about this.
And I am not just talking of leaders in the national level. I'm not talking of presidents and governors and senators and House of Reps. I'm talking of all of us who are privileged. I hope you know. And many of us here, most of us here are privileged. What is our concern for the people next door? For the poor people next door, what is our concern? What is even our concern for our megadis? For those who do petty work for us, what is our concern? If that is not happening, it means we are failing as shepherds in our responsibility of being shepherds. I hope you know that in this Africa, in this Nigeria, there never used to be a distinction between the neighborhood of the rich and the neighborhood of the poor. I hope you know. I hope you know that poor people and rich people used to live together. That's the heart of the blacksmith. That's the heart of the king. That's the heart of it used to be together. It's a completely new, terrible thing that has happened to us. And people are enjoying it. They are enjoying it. They ask you what part of town you live in. And that immediately you tell them the part of town you live in, you know your status. And I am saying, by the time you segregate society, what used to be called apartheid, and Nigerians were in the forefront of fighting apartheid, where the white man said, look, you blacks, you live there. We white, we live here. That is exactly what we are doing to our fellow black people. Exactly. And you know, it makes it easier when revolution comes. I hope you know. It makes it easier. It means the poor people know where to go.
Father George Ehusani, and of course, Father Ehusani, the theologian, human rights activist, social commentator, and former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat in Nigeria, current Executive Director of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation, is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. You were talking about poverty there, the revenge of the poor. Many people think of Nigeria as being an economic powerhouse in Africa, with the continent's largest economy and one of its richest nations. Why does it have so many poor people?
It is one of the saddest realities in this country that at a time when Nigeria has produced the most number of multimillionaires, we have nearly 100 million poor people by the United Nations $1.90 benchmark. It is a shame. It should be a source of embarrassment to every one of us that belongs to the elite. When we have no provision for the poor, UNICEF, for example, has a recommendation of 26% of the budget of a country for education. What is the percentage of our budget that we channel towards education? 6, 7, 8%. What about healthcare? What about sanitation? A situation where in the 21st century, many poor people in this country cannot have electricity, cannot have pipe bomb water. When I was young, we used to have taps all over the place, public taps, drinkable, treated water. Now all that is gone, and poor people are scavenging for food and fetching water from the gutter to drink. Now, that kind of situation is inexcusable. In a country where people are living in palatial mansions and have houses overseas, and people are able to buy private jets, and those who superintend our society are awarding themselves humongous amount of benefits, in such a country, it is inexcusable. And our country is rich with all kinds of resources. Go to Nasarawa State here. Every inch of soil has a lot of resources. And we export the largest amount of crude oil in Africa. But we have kept our people poor because it benefits a number of people to do that. Actually, in some parts of this country, it is precisely the poverty of the people that is enabling the ruling class to remain ruling class. Meaning it benefits a lot of those who are in the political elite to keep the people poor, to keep them uneducated, to keep them unhealthy, so that they can continue to exploit them.
But just being realistic,
yes.
I mean, I'm not saying that you're not being realistic, you clearly are.
Maybe more realistic, yes.
But well, just looking at the figures,
yes.
Nigeria is currently experiencing sluggish growth. I mean, it's been a one-crop economy for a long time. Plus, those same people that you're talking about, the poor, are also responsible in many ways for the population growing as quickly as it is. I mean, that it is now growing faster than GDP per capita. And so you're seeing an increase in poverty
I feel
rates.
very sad when people blame the victim. When the victim is further flogged and blamed for their situation. Research after research, sociological research after research has demonstrated that with economic advancement, with educational advancement, the number of children that families have reduces. That has been the trend in the last 100 years in the world. Now, if you keep people in poverty, the only power they have is the power of reproduction. And you want to take that out of them? So the point is, we are just blaming the victim. Look at when England began to make progress with the Industrial Revolution. Look at when America began to make progress. The number of children began to go down. So that is not the place to start. The place to start is raise the level of education. When people know for sure, or almost for sure, that if they have 5 children, that they will live to old age with those 5 children. They won't be tempted to have 10, 15 children. As you know, the culture of raising 10, 11, 12 children started at a time when they couldn't be sure that 1 or 2 will survive. And that is still in the genes. It will take some time for them to get to recognize that, oh, this family before us, they had 7 children and 6 of them, or the 7 of them, survived.
Well, unfortunately, whilst that is happening, they're coming to terms with it, and I'm not blaming them specifically, I'm blaming the whole system. The Brookings Institute report also suggests that going forward, we're likely to see more people living in extreme poverty in Nigeria than they are today. So in spite of what is being said by the Nigerian government and all the other people in it, things are likely to get worse for the poor before it gets better.
And things don't need to get worse if we do what we must do today.
Right.
And I am saying there is enough wealth in this country for people to have a dignified life, for people to be able to go to school, for example, and not have to live the poor, destitute kind of life that you see in our public schools. We can afford free education, at least at primary school level, with the wealth we have today. We can afford it. The point is, if we think that we can live liberal capitalism, ruthless liberal capitalism,
right,
where a few smart Alex can actually accumulate the resources of the country that can raise a whole village out of poverty, one person. They say the world can accommodate the needs of several billions of people, but the world cannot accommodate the greed of even one person. So the point is that we need to address the greed of the elite. We need to address the sense of equality of the elite. I mean, when the elite can spend 10, 15, 20 million on one of their children, and they do not consider that those children in the villages amount to anything, I am saying, let them think again. Because one, apart from the fact that they will account to God for what they did with the resources that God has blessed this country with, I am saying that we don't have too many years left.
Right.
We need to begin to do some form of restitution.
And are you seeing anything positive out of the Buhari administration that has essentially portrayed itself as a socialist-leaning government that cares about the poor? I mean, the economy, arguably an area that elicits the biggest concern for many Nigerians. I mean, we're seeing high inflation, spiraling unemployment. The unemployment has in fact tripled to the point where up to 50% of the youth in this country are unemployed and underemployed. I mean, have you kept score of the Buhari administration's performance in that sector?
By 2015, when this regime came in for the first time, many Nigerians had a lot of hope of a transformation. But by 2019, many of us we don't have much hope that things will get better.
And yet he was voted back into office.
Yes, he was voted back into office. But I don't see much in the offing to show that in the next 1, 2, 3 years, there's a major transformation that is going to happen. And I will call on those who are in government. I will call on those who are in government at all levels, that it is in your own interest. It is in the interest of your immediate families to do something. I am actually calling for restitution now, meaning that if Nigeria is going to go forward, there are limited resources. Now, if you continue to think that you have a right to be multi-millionaires and ride jeeps, bulletproof jeeps of 120 million naira, and there are no public buses, there's no public rail line, light rails. If you think you can continue and you think you are justified, you don't have a conscience problem. You do not, you think you are smart enough to gather the resources of society and accumulate them and leave the people in destitution. I am saying there's not much, there are not many years ahead for you to continue to do this. So I am calling for restitution, by which I mean that what people have accumulated unjustly, it may not be called stealing, but what people have accumulated because of the structural injustices in society. I'll give you an example.
No, you have to hold that thought. I'm very sorry about this. We'll continue this chat in a minute. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we continue our chat with Father George Ehusani. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, as you may know, a recent report by the World Poverty Clock shows Nigeria has overtaken India as the country with the most extreme poverty in the world. The country has 89.6 million people living in extreme poverty, as against India's 71.5 million. So what's responsible for this in a country that's widely seen as having enough resources to lift millions out of poverty? Well, my guest today is the human rights anti-poverty activist and social commentator, Father George Ehusani. He attributes deepening poverty in this country to huge corruption and gross mismanagement. To him, Nigeria is more rotten than a dead cat, a place where incomprehensible rites are performed by an elite political class in the service of a divinity called money and graft, to the detriment of the majority of the people. Here's Father Ehusani in one of his increasingly popular homilies, warning that the poor are coming, and they're coming for the elite.
But the society we are creating today, I am saying it is not sustainable. What did I call it? It's not sustainable. We can't run a society like this for the next 100 years. It's not possible. So if you have a future, if you dream of a future for your children and grandchildren, you need to join me in shouting against this. If you dream of a future for your children and grandchildren, you need to join me in saying, this is inappropriate, this is dangerous, this is destructive. Like I said, it is not our high walls, it is not our barbed wires, it is not our electrified fences that will save us. What will save us is that the poor should be included at the dining table. Yes, the poor and the handicapped and the widow and the orphan, they should be included at the dining table. That is what will save us.
Father George Ehusani, the theologian, human rights activist, social commentator, and former Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat in Nigeria, currently Executive Director of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation, is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. So how different or easy will it be to replicate the development model in India here in Nigeria in reducing poverty? I mean, what are they doing right? President Buhari used India and China as an example when he gave a speech on Democracy Day. He said he was planning to lift 100 million people out of poverty. Can that example of India and China be followed up by Nigeria?
We can actually have an indigenous model. We don't need to copy another country to look at the structural injustices in this country and correct them. For example, we operate a model whereby the colonial masters came to this country and awarded themselves and the white-collar jobs that they had much 10 times higher value than what the black guys, Nigerian guys did. I mean, cleaning the road, taking care of doing sanitary inspectors, doing all that. So I am saying, who decided that the work of a senior politician, public office holder, is 10 or 20 times more value than the one who takes care of the streets, than the traffic policeman? Who decided that? This is structural injustice, meaning that the powerful, the elite, the powerful, who are in a position to fix their own remunerations, decided that 18,000 or 30,000 now is what the person who sweeps the street is entitled to.
That's the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right.
And that he or she who is in this position is entitled to 700 or 800,000.
Right. And 30,000 naira is about $100 or so.
It's about $100.
Right.
Who decided
That's a
that?
month.
Who decided that this is it? And yet we go to the same market. That these people that were paying 30,000 naira, they have families. Even if we succeed in bringing down their families to 2 or 3 children, they are supposed to rent houses. They are supposed to feed their children. They are supposed to have transportation on 30,000. They go to the market to buy the same rice and yam and so on the same 30,000. Whereas another person, maybe with the same number of children, is earning 800,000 or 1 million in a month. That is gross injustice that needs to be addressed. And we don't need to look at another country to correct such injustice, meaning the gap between the highest earner in any corporation, in any institution, and the lowest earner needs to be looked into in this country.
Right. Now, one of the ways of doing that, because a lot of people might dispute your suggestion that this country is going to see a revolution soon, because Nigeria simply does not have a history of that. There are too many divisions within society, so they might argue that that's not likely to happen. But I don't want to get into whether or not it's, I mean, the points you're making are very sound. You've established the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation, which is a way perhaps to start to correct the approach to leadership that many politicians take. What does that involve? What do you actually do there?
Well, when I finished my term as Secretary General of the Catholic Secretariat of Nigeria, it was in 2007 that I brought people together to found the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation. I felt that with the gifts God has given to me, the talents He has given to me, and the exposure, the privileged exposure that God has given to me, what can I do after these years? At that point, I was 50 at that point, and I decided that I think it is appropriate to invest my time and talents and contacts into leadership formation for better quality leaders within the church and outside the church. Because where we are today, we are on account of bad leadership, on account of leaders that have no concept of what it means to be for sacrificial love, service. They have very little or no concept of such. So in the last 11 years, we have been doing trainings for various categories of people, including young leaders in secondary schools and other youths, on the dynamics of leadership as service, and not leadership as state capture, as conquest of the people. So we've been doing that, and we are hoping that what we invest in these people, potential leaders, will bear fruits because we take them, for example, we take the people we do leadership workshop for to the slums, and we just expose them. We give them brooms to sweep in the slums. And many come out crying, shedding tears, because there are many children of the elite who do not know that the level of poverty in this country, who do not know that there are families where the breadwinner earns 15,000 and no other income comes to the house for a whole month. These are amounts that rich people's children just waste. So when you expose them to the stark reality of the acrimonious poverty in the land, it does touch the consciences of some of them. Now, that is why it is a terrible thing when leaders cannot go freely among their people. When leaders are going in dark glass vehicles and bulletproof cars, and they cannot even see, and they are going with bullion vans, or what you call the pilot vehicles that are speeding all through, and they cannot see the people and the kind of decrepit life that people live, it's not a good thing. But when people are confronted, and that's what we do in our leadership training, we confront them with a reality. If we are not able to take them there physically, we show them videos that show the real situation on the ground. And some of them are touched. Many do weep,
Well,
and go back with a commitment to do something about it.
Well, I hope that continues to work. Father George Ehusani, thank you very much.
Thank
indeed.
you, Charles, and thank you, viewers.
Well, that's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.